Hello, everybody. I am Drew Duncan. Do not forget that Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is all at Drew Duncan Radio. Additionally, you can find me on YouTube and Patreon by looking for Drew Duncan Radio. And do not forget, I am wherever you are listening to podcasts. Simply tell your device to play Drew Duncan on iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Deezer, CastBox. I am wherever you are listening to podcasts. It's no secret by now, if you follow me, that I am an extreme Denver Broncos fan. And growing up, you have to understand that I feel that I lived through those Super Bowl debacles as much as fans that were in their prime during the 80s, because my dad had those games on tape. So I witnessed Denver get smashed over and over again. As a matter of fact, I'll never forget when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was watching the time they got smoked by Washington. And I was like, Dad, I thought that they lost this game because they were up 10-0 right away. I mean, they scored their first offensive play. John Elway threw a bomb to Ricky Natil, and my dad was in the kitchen getting himself something to eat. And he goes, well, what quarter is it? And I said, well, it's the first quarter. And he goes, oh, just wait. And then, of course, Doug Williams came out, became the first African-American quarterback MVP, had a phenomenal comeback after he got hurt. And it was just a huge win for Washington on so many different levels, obviously, and particularly Doug Williams, who contributed greatly to his community as a result. And I'll never forget watching Steve Atwater grow up, right? Growing up, I should say. And Steve Atwater, I think, was a favorite of Bronco fans, and I know that he was indefinitely a favorite of mine, and it was really awesome that he got to retire as a Denver Bronco, even though he ended up with the Jets for, what was it, one season, somewhere in that neighborhood. And we will all remember him as being a Bronco. That's just the way that there is to it, period. And the thing about Steve Atwater is, if you want to define his career, it was Ed Reed that said that he would give up his Hall of Fame spot if that meant Steve Atwater could get in. And understand that this was, I think, Steve Atwater's 9th time on the ballot for Pro Bowl selection, or for Hall of Fame selection, pardon me. 9th time. And to a lot of people, it was long overdue. But understand, every year the NFL doesn't necessarily have a set mandate as to how many people get in. But they do say that every year between 4 and 8 players will be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. There's a standard. Deion Sanders can say whatever he wants to, but there is a standard as to how good an athlete has to be. And, you know, for Steve Atwater, his game wasn't interceptions. His game wasn't big plays that made you go, wow, man, he picked that thing off and ran it all the way back for a touchdown. That wasn't necessarily his game. His game was roaming and letting people know that he was there. And Steve Atwater was an influence that was along the lines of Ronnie Lott. And I believe that guys like Ronnie Lott and Steve Atwater influenced defenses that we saw later on with the Baltimore Ravens, defenses that we saw later on with the Legion of Boom and the Seattle Seahawks, because of the way that they played that roaming style of defense, that a lot of coaches decided, you know what, we're just going to have other guys roam all over the field, but we're not going to do that with one guy. We're going to do that with a lot of guys. And so that roaming style of defense out of these 4-1-6s and 3-1-7s really became a standard to some coaches in this league. We're going to knock you in the mouth. That is old school football. And, of course, for a lot of people, the career-defining moment was when he took down Christian Okoye, right? I mean, me as a Broncos fan, watching that as a kid, even I knew what that really meant. You know, Christian Okoye was a big guy, and he was known for going in, getting those tough yards like a lot of running backs were at that time, but there was something different about him. Okoye had a lot of speed, and Okoye was on a different level than a lot of guys that were his size, because a lot of them played fullback, but Okoye was a full-on running back. him, Jerome Bettis, they were not necessarily guys at that time that were just around every street corner. I mean, now, you've got running backs that are, 6'6", 6'4", but it wasn't like that then. And so when Steve Atwater put the pipe game to him and let him know who was there, that was a defining moment for Steve Atwater. He was one of the huge reasons why the Denver Broncos ended up winning those 2 Super Bowls. I mean, those 2 Super Bowl seasons with John Elway, that defense was an integral aspect of what happened. You had Bill Romanowski, you had Neil Smith, you had Alfred Williams, you had Steve Atwater, you had your longevity guys, Tyrone Braxton. Unfortunately, Dennis Smith never got one, a beloved Bronco. But that was a big part of it, was that defense. And Steve Atwater was that guy that if you were going to go over the middle and you were going to try and make a catch, you knew that. See, they used to call it hearing footsteps, right? That's what they called it, was hearing footsteps. You knew that Atwater was somewhere lurking, and it scared the hell out of you. And it prevented a lot of teams from taking certain shots, and as a result, you're taking away certain aspects of another team's playbook. See, that's how Steve Atwater affected the game of football for the Denver Broncos. Other teams that they're going against, they know that certain plays that are very successful to them are going to be exceptionally dangerous to run. You got to figure out a way to get away from Atwater. Because we're talking about taking away deep seam routes. We're talking about taking away deep post routes. We're talking about taking plays over the middle. And Atwater was a guy that you could use to blitz, and he would sack quarterbacks. He would get in the backfield, obviously, like I made mention, and make plays on running backs. Atwater was a real good utility guy. So it didn't necessarily matter about the interception numbers or touchdown numbers from a guy from his position, especially back then, because that's what safeties did. They just roamed all over the field, and they made plays. They made plays that were physical. And the idea is to take away some of those over-the-middle plays to make it even more difficult to go deep, and that was what made Atwater such an exceptional guy. See, not every safety, even in this day and age or really in any era, has the capability of taking away an entire set of plays from another team. But that's what made Atwater special. You see, the thing about the NFL and all this stuff is and I've talked about this before, so I'm going to be very short with this. The numbers, and I've said this 100 times over, the numbers don't lie, but they don't tell the entire story either. Sometimes numbers are inflated. Sometimes numbers lie to us and tell us that somebody's better than what they maybe really are, or that they're actually better than what the numbers would indicate. I mean, one of the best examples that I gave was Eric Berry when he was wanting a contract extension one of the first times with the Kansas City Chiefs. That same season, Von Miller got $75 million. And Eric Berry actually had more tackles than Von Miller. Let that sink in. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Von Miller. He's a hell of a linebacker. Don't get me wrong. He's sacked 50 quarterbacks in the NFL. Please do not misconstrue what I'm telling you. I'm just saying that sometimes the numbers just tell different stories. And predicated upon what position you play and what capacity you're used in, those things can kind of take twists and turns. And for Atwater, sometimes when you're so good as a defensive back or a player in particular, that you're going to get lined up in situations where teams just kind of out-scheme somebody else. And they find you out of position and they're able to catch you, and that's how they're able to win football games. But a lot of times when you were playing the Denver Broncos, especially when they had Phillips as their defensive coordinator, he was very good at understanding, and still is, about how to use every player on the football field to the best of their ability and how to take advantage of the assets and things that they bring to the table for their football team. And Steve Atwater was just one of those guys that you could use in a lot of different ways. And so while some of the numbers are not exactly where maybe people say that they should be for the Hall of Fame, I'm going to tell you right now, Atwater is certainly deserving, and I don't think that there's too many people out there that would tell you otherwise. Guys, I am Drew Duncan. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is all at Drew Duncan Radio. You can find me on YouTube and Patreon by looking for Drew Duncan. And do not forget that I am wherever you are listening to podcasts. Simply tell your device to play Drew Duncan on Spreaker, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Deezer, CastBox, Apple Podcasts. I am wherever you are listening to podcasts. And as always, don't you dare touch that dial.